Welcome to the Creative Plan Podcast Network. Join us as we share our favorite RPGs, one-shot games, tabletop games, reviews of items, and convention panels, and other exciting things that we run into from time to time. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion to Ragnarok story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and rpgpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Jennifer Bushrow, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the panel Balancing Creative Work and a Busy Life. We are all busy, but each of us has our own pressures as we navigate life. Perhaps you're a full-time student or a full-time worker, or you split your time between the two. Parenting is definitely a full-time job. Maybe you're a caretaker for an elderly or ill relative, or chronic illness dominates your own life. Dishes, laundry, and dust are a constant. Sometimes the things that demand our time are actually fun, like training a new pet, going on dates with our significant other, spending holidays and vacation days on much-needed rest, or exploring the world. Sometimes our time is spent on being a good person, volunteering, political activism, exercise, religious services, helping a friend move. Regardless of what you have on your plate, we can all of us say we are busy with a capital B. So how do you make time for creative work in your busy life? Whether you're creating just for fun or you have an editor breathing down your neck for your latest draft, how do you balance your writing or artwork with your other responsibilities? Today, KJ, Janet, and myself are here to share with you our productivity tips and tricks in the hopes that you will leave Tucson Comic-Con today with ideas that you can immediately implement in your own lives and for your own work. So first we're going to share a little about ourselves professionally, what we write, as well as personally, the elements of our lives that take up our time. KJ, would you like to start us off?
I sure would, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. My name is KJ Kapsa. I'm a fantasy and science fiction author who lives here in Tucson. I've been here for about the past 6 or 7 years. I write short fiction. I think to date I've had something like 92 stories published in various venues, translated, podcasted, reprinted, and so forth. My first print collection came out last year, The Ramshead Algorithm and Other Stories, which is available in the usual places online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Powell's, IndieBound. I also have a couple copies on me if you can't wait to get your hands on it, and you also want them signed. So I've been writing fiction for about 15 years. I guess everything that is not writing related falls under personal, so I will list these other time commitments. I also have a day job. I have always been fully employed since I graduated from college. I work for a data analytics company with a focus on science and health, so I have that full-time job that takes up my week. I am very happily married and into my relationship a lot. And over the past year, I have also had an injury that has involved an awful lot of physical therapy and a sort of strict exercise program and all of these other things. So even when I'm not injured, I also enjoy being active. I hike, I go swimming, I go roller skating, and all of this is directly opposed to sitting quietly in a chair and typing. So balancing these things is always a bit of a challenge, and that's why I'm on this panel.
Hi, I'm Janie Lee Simner. I'm also a fantasy writer. I'm the author of the Bones of Fairy trilogy of Thephies, which is based on the Icelandic sagas. I also wrote the script for the video game, The Huntsman Winter's Curse, and an episode of the Zombies Run app, which was kind of a fangirl moment for me because I love that app. But and I used to, say, well, anything else was secondary to writing. I'm just going to write, and then I could have some hobbies and volunteer work around it. But it's a simple thing. You just put your writing first. And then I became a parent and had to settle my dad's estate after he passed away, and had open heart surgery. And I began to have a lot more empathy for the fact that I used to say, it's as simple as just make your writing a priority. Now I say that it's not that simple.
And as I said, my name is Jennifer Bushrow. I write speculative fiction, primarily fairy tales, fantasy, that kind of jazz. for multiple age groups, middle grade, young adult, and adult, and multiple forms, flash fiction, short stories, poetry, novels. I'm a daughter, girlfriend, friend. I love to travel and explore the world, whether it's on a day trip or to a foreign country. I go out dancing multiple times a week for exercise and socialization. I go to church. I occasionally do things like taking archery lessons and volunteering and political activism. I spend most of my day working home alone, so I like to have a pretty busy social life.
We should talk about political activism later. That's the other thing I forgot to mention.
All right, yeah.
That's part of my life too.
So the biggest complaint I hear is, I don't have the time. And I'm guilty of myself of this occasionally. But we do have the time, or at least the ability to set aside some time to prioritize our work, even if it's only a half-hour a day. Some creatives get up early, some stay up late, some work on their lunch hour, or while they commute, or on the weekends. How and when do you make the time to work? Go in whatever order you would like. Do you want to keep going cycles, or do you want to switch?
Jenny can go.
I have no strong feelings, but well, now it's become a lot simpler in a lot of ways because now I start working after I drop my daughter off at school, and I stop working when it's time to pick her up. Even if I'm convinced I'm just getting a good head of steam and, in another half hour I would start being brilliant. Mm-hmm. So, now it's kind of, I know where that time is. Before that, I would try to, just start my day with writing. My husband would get up, he would go to his day job, and so I'd be up and I would, find a coffee shop and slowly work my way into working on my story. And then I don't get to quite do that anymore. But I don't think there was any trick for it at that. I don't think there was any trick for it either time. It was mostly, eventually there was a point where I had to just sit down and brute force getting things done. When I was younger, when I was in college, just out of college, I did have to, not so much convince myself, but I had to set boundaries. I was in the college town I'd gone to school in. My friends all lived nearby, and they just wanted to hang out, just like we did in the dorms. And I had to learn how to ignore the phone, ignore knocks on the door. There was one memorable point where a friend who was determined not to understand that I was working in the evenings after my then day job, she called several times. It was back when people were still using answering machines, so I could hear her going, "Pick up the phone, I know you're there." And then I heard this knock on the door, and she knew I was there, and I knew she knew I was there, and I just kept writing. I had to train my friends at that point into the fact that this time was being set aside.
So for how to make the time to write, to draw, to do whatever to focus on your art, I'm a huge believer in harnessing the power of habit. If you do your creative work under a certain set of circumstances every day, or almost every day, or near to it as you can, then when that set of circumstances or time of day rolls around, you will kind of autopilot into it, which will get you over the hump of I don't want to, or something else cool is going on. It will just become, this is a thing I do. Like if you always brush your teeth before bed, if you always, if you always sit down at a certain time of day to work, then that will just be part of your routine, and doing it will be not frictionless, but as close to that as you can get. That being said, I think it's important to balance harnessing the power of habit with adjustment and long-term flexibility. Different priorities and different drains on your time will come up during life. Maybe something that works very well for you during one period will not work when your first child is born, for example, or it will not work well when you suddenly decide to take like a larger class load than you have at the past in school, and you need to find like a different day to do that. So if there should be a day or a time where you sit down to do your creative work, and you can't because a new thing has come up and taken that time commitment away from you, establish a new routine as soon as you can. I think that helps a lot. I used to do my writing, I would set aside an hour every day right after I was done with my day job, but now that time has been superseded by physical therapy exercises that I do, because right now that's also something I need to prioritize. So my routine for when I write has turned into after dinner, which took some getting used to, but now that it's more of a habit again, it's something that's a little bit easier for me to stick with.
I think about the authors I admire and then remind myself that I have the same 24 hours in a day that they do. I also gave up TV in 2012, 7 years ago, because I found that I didn't. Thank you. You too?
I don't do any TV. It's not worth your time. Advertisements, none of that. It's boring.
So I weigh the cost of those hours spent. So I don't look at it online. I don't look at it through the actual TV. And I'm very mindful about consuming movies and social media and Netflix and YouTube and other things that are in that TV vein. And I find that keeping that sacred time is enough for me. All right, next question. Sometimes the things that hinder us isn't time, but our own minds. Doubt, depression, grief, anxiety, imposter syndrome, etc. are very real obstacles. Have you faced or face any of these, and how did you combat them? Can you take it first?
So I'm glad I'm first here because Janie is going to have a much more valuable answer than I will.
Actually, I was thinking you go first. I can form an answer. So.
Okay. So my answer here is that because what I write is short fiction, and what I write is largely determined by my own time and my own schedule. I've come as far as I have because I have determined these deadlines for myself. I have determined when I'm going to write these stories and submit them and send them out, with the exception of having all the launch activities around my first book. But because my momentum is self-generated, I can stop if I need to. I can stop if I suddenly decide that I'm not worth it and everything's terrible, and then I feel like being sad for 4 days. There aren't any real consequences other than my own self-respect, which is a real consequence, but not perhaps what we're talking about here. So I guess there is an answer in that, which is a way to deal with depression or imposter syndrome or feelings of anxiety or lack of self-confidence or something, is to integrate your creative work into your life in such a way that you know your own limits and you know your own obstacles. If you know that you struggle with getting things done, if you know that you have trouble managing your ADHD or something like that, don't commit to a massive project and say, oh yeah, it'll be totally fine. Like you're setting yourself up there for a difficult time. It's one thing to challenge yourself, but it's another thing to go like, oh yeah, my depression will magically go away once like this milestone is reached. So I have some depression and anxiety, and I manage it better these days than I have in the past, but I think committing to a book launch, if I hadn't been in a space where I was managing that, would be a terrible, terrible idea. So, know yourself, be gentle with yourself, understand that sometimes your healthcare comes first and your mental state comes first, and you can't squeeze productivity out of yourself infinitely, I should add.
And I have had also a couple of go-arounds with, fairly deep depression. And the most important thing looking back is, when you realize that's going on, which can be tricky in itself, just go ahead and get professional help. Every time I did, I wondered why I had waited so long and let myself be unhappy for as long as I did. Even though the funny thing about being depressed is you don't have the energy to take the steps to get beyond being depressed. Another long-term thing I've had to do for kind of balancing mental health and writing is at one point I did some sort of deep soul searching and had to tell myself, how worthy I am as a human being has nothing to do with whether this story sells. I don't have to justify my existence by selling a novel. I want to sell a novel. I want to sell these short stories, but internalizing and really believing that whether or not I sell what I'm writing, that has nothing to do with my self-worth, has been a huge thing for being able to balance writing and the rest of my life.
Doubt and fear are things I struggle with pretty consistently, no matter how many things I write or how many publication credits I earn. And in speaking to other writers, I've come to understand that this is pretty normal. Jane Yolen, who's written more than 350 books, posted on Twitter that she still gets rejections, and that helps somewhat. Not the whole misery loves company, but more the idea that doubt and fear and rejection are normal. They're just part of this industry. So to combat them, I remind myself these are all parts of the process, and I tailor self-pep talks. I have a document full of quotes for ideas that whether I'm facing fear or doubt or motivation or feel like giving up, I have sections of them, and then I can self-pep talk myself whenever I need it. Another thing that's part, you want to go?
You can finish your statement before I wanted to add something.
I'm switching to a different thing.
Okay, great. I also wanted to add a couple suggestions for sort of more garden variety fear doubts that don't have quite as much to do with mental illness, because I think we kind of like shunted into that topic.
Mm-hmm.
I find that something that helps me deal with doubt and fear and rejection is like, this sounds very silly, but to stand in front of a mirror and tell myself how great I am and how stupid everybody else is. And it's deeply childish, and the childishness of it sort of knocks me out of my own negative thinking. Because like, it's stupid that you have to stand here and stand in front of a mirror and tell yourself that. Like, and it helps me laugh at myself and like laugh at the whole situation and sort of let it go. Another thing that can help a lot is that if your own doubts or whatever are in your way, you can switch to another project for a while. There's no law against that, and sometimes it's not really yourself that you're doubting. You're just stuck on whatever it is you're creating.
I started telling myself that if I were really, when I was in imposter syndrome places, if I was really as awful as I thought, I watched friends go through that, and I knew they were better than they thought they were, and they weren't horrible. And if I were as horrible as I thought in down moments, how could I be the only person seeing myself truly? All my friends were clearly wrong when they said they were, doubting and maybe shouldn't do this. But if I were really awful, then I wouldn't be able to see myself that clearly. So it must all be nonsense. I don't know if I explained that in a way that makes sense, but.
I also want to add that when all else fails and you think that you really are a very terrible creator, it helps to examine everything else that's in your field and look at all of the other terrible works of art that are in your field. Like if I go into a bookstore and I see a lot of books I've read that I haven't liked, and I've said, well, somebody bought this and published it, and somebody is buying them, and if what I write is terrible, maybe idiots will buy my work too.
Well, and it had to make through multiple gatekeepers. If you get traditionally published, it had to pass beta readers, your agent, an editor, the acquisitions team, all of the organization that exists around a publishing company, and everyone was like, yes, we want this book. And then you're like, what the heck were they thinking? So, yeah.
They would all have to
Every
be
book has an audience.
inferior for that to have to get past all those people. Mm-hmm. They would all have to be inferior in addition to you.
Yeah. Every story has an audience. Every piece of art has an audience. I think that can be helpful to keep that in mind. So all three of us are pursuing writing as a career, which means there's no such thing anymore as writing when we feel like it. We must have consistent output, whether we're constrained by contracts and publishing deadlines or our own goals. So I want to know, what are the standards you set for yourself? Are they daily or weekly or monthly? Are they measured in word count, scenes written, time spent in front of your computer, or something else? It's your turn.
I've gone around, I think I have to change, what my metric is over time. I've done word count a lot, especially when I had a full long day and 2,000 words a day. I've done, spend 4 hours in front of the screen. When I first started writing, my standard was, when I was writing in the evenings after a day job, it was 1 sentence a day. And I hoped that I would do more, but it's not very scary to think, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a sentence. And then once I did, usually I keep going. If I didn't, it wasn't a big deal, but I think it just, what you use depends on where you are and the time. I've used NaNoWriMo occasionally just because it fit with what I was working on and I let it work for me. I've never forced a project into it. And I've done that. So yeah, I guess I don't have any one answer because it's changed so much for me over time.
By the way, there's a NaNoWriMo panel later if anyone's interested. 1:30? Right, so I saw that. I'm on it, KJ's on it. Yeah, 1:30 to 2:20.
November 2nd is too late to have not decided yet if I'm nanoing, but the whole day is gone.
Well, that's
I know.
discussion
I'm
that I had. For me, the metric that I usually use is time, because it's there are so many different things, at least that go into writing. There's the actual writing of the story, but there's also revising. There's also falling down a Wikipedia hole while you try to nail one specific research point. And I spent earlier in the week, so I'm revising a novel right now, and I want to get the mechanics of the fictional night sky correct. So I'm like, okay, the certain plot point depends on when a constellation rises, and I don't know too much about astronomy, so I said, okay, I'm going to research this. So I spent about an hour and a half trying to get like 3 basic questions answered. And I didn't actually change anything in my manuscript, but I count that as creative work because that's how long it was taking to solve that problem. And if I set some kind of rule for myself based on word count or page count or something like that, I would still be sitting there going, oh, I haven't written anything because how many hours is it going to take to resolve this astronomy question? And that doesn't work for everybody, I suppose, but at least it helps me feel better about when I'm not writing anything, I'm still engaging in the creative process. I'm still researching, I'm still brainstorming, I'm still gathering background information. I'm still asking if any of my friends on Twitter know an astronomer that can help me. And in fact they do, and that's something that I have to do during my next writing session is write to this astronomer who's going to like help me with my book. So I think that all counts.
I agree with that. I measure my output by my time as well. I work 40 hours a week, so I treat this as my full-time day job. And I do, Monday's my miscellaneous day. I work on emails, write on con, short stories, poetry, and then the other 5 days I work on my novel. And since I work 6 days a week, I do about 6.5 to 7.5 hours a day, which gives me the flexibility to then have socialization in my life and other activities. Keep me out of the house. All right, next question. Lots of creatives have a method to help them transition into work mode even when they don't feel like it. Some meditate before they sit down at their desk. Some light a certain candle when they begin, or use a special pen, or turn on a playlist they've created just for that project. Some need to fulfill their morning routine of walking the dog and getting the kids to school before they feel comfortable enough to disappear into their mind. And of course, coffee and tea are common creative kickstarters. Do you have a ritual, routine, and or beverage of choice that helps you quickly enter into work mode? AJ?
Sort of. I have a pre-writing ritual that's totally arbitrary, but as I mentioned before, being a big believer in harnessing the power of habit, I think the important thing is to just do one tiny thing before you sit down and start to cue yourself into like, I'm ready now. And basically, I take a can of soda and I open it and I toast the universe and I say thank you for the ability to create, to be alive and to be able to do this, to be lucky enough to exist in a country that is stable enough for me to like do my art on the side and not worry about people I love and all the rest of it. And it's a tiny thing. It takes 5 seconds, and then I'm ready. Unless we have run out of soda, so maybe there's a flaw in my plan here, and I should just go with like raising a cup of water or something.
Well, that is just lovely. I might steal that from you.
Sure. I did. I totally did.
I like that. Taking a moment to actually appreciate what you're getting to do. But my best practice used to be, start writing before you can do anything else because I'm more likely to like not get in my own way. That also doesn't work when you have a young child. Because now, there've been a few, actually now, she has to get dressed, we have to drive up to school. School is about 15 minutes away from home. Then I also, need to get physical activity in. So I guess, but I do follow a consistent routine and that still works to some extent. Only now it's school drop off, half-hour walk, sit down and write. And I guess that works that also works. And habit, goes a long way. I do use playlists sometimes. And that also, if I'm really not working, it's like, okay, put the music on and get to work.
I drink coffee as I check Twitter for a half hour and wake up. I need to wake up.
Half hour.
I know. Well, just 40 minutes. I try not to push it. I set a timer to be very mindful about my social media consumption. And then I eat breakfast and then I get to work. And I actually stole KJ's idea. Before we were friends, I read an interview with him about how we toast the universe. And I was like, this is a great idea. So I do that now. I sit down to work and I do my own toast with my beverage, but it's usually coffee. And then I get to work and I listen to instrumental music as I write. I don't like words. I find that distracting as I'm writing. And I don't stick with the same playlist. I like variety. But those are my entrance points into work. Creative work is often thought of as a solitary endeavor, yet some people find it highly motivating to team up. Whether it's joining an online community, attending a local write-in, or emailing your accountability partner at the end of the week, bringing others into the process can help us achieve our goals. How do you do this? Jan, you're first.
One thing I do for social contact is I have kind of a small group of writers that when we can on Fridays, we just choose a coffee shop and get together and write together. and we're still working, maybe not quite as productively as when we're by ourselves, but we're also not talking the whole time. And it just gives you that little bit of human contact that you don't get during the week when you're writing. I will say one upside to having a child is all of a sudden, I was worried about, I'd have to meet all these parents who weren't writers and might not even like to read, and maybe there'll be all these awful people who have nothing in common with me. And actually the opposite has happened. And actually meeting parents and having sort of parent friends, it's like you get socialization whether you want it or not. But that's actually been a good thing and not the thing I feared it would be.
To help with the isolation of writing, I do like to occasionally meet some other people who write together. I have a group of friends that about once a month we meet together sometimes and write in libraries.
Yeah, I totally left you guys out.
I assume you're waiting for me to talk about that part.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So that is a thing I do. I have also made efforts to make friends with writers in the Tucson area, and even if we hang out socially and the only thing we wind up talking about is work, it still makes you feel less alone. There's also another friend of mine who runs Meetup in Mostly Books once a month, the second Saturdays of the month. It's like 1 to 3, isn't it?
Yes.
The second Saturday?
I think it's the second Saturdays, yeah.
It's, yes. Mostly Books, second Saturday.
Yeah.
In fact, she'll be on some of the panels.
Oh yeah, she can talk about that more. But that is open to everybody, writers of all levels. There's no membership, just show up. And that is come meet other writers and talk about the process. For me, I do find that knowing other writers and writing alongside them and just knowing that they're there is also very helpful. If I can't do it in person, I also have a few Slack groups, writers groups that I'm a part of, where I will sign on and there will be a channel that will say, these are people who are writing, and I'll post, I'm writing, guys, and then I'll write, and even if nobody responds to me, it somehow feels like I'm less alone, and that can be helpful. And it's also a great way to harness social pressure from other people. If you go into a space, whether that's real or virtual, where everybody else has their heads down and working, if before you were like, I don't really feel like this, when you come in there you go, I better do it because that's what everybody else is. And then before you know it, you're sucked into your work and really moving along.
Yeah. So I'm a member of a Syphilis Slack group online, and in person I attend the local Writers Coffee House meetings, which actually, as he said, mostly books, second Saturday. This month it conflicts with Tucson. So this month's been canceled, but if you're interested in checking it out in December, there's a Facebook group you can be a part of, or you can simply show up. And it's not a critique group, but rather a place for authors and artists to commiserate, share advice, cheer each other on, ask questions.
And you can also come to Tucson if you want to hang out with other writers next weekend.
That's true. So between writing and editing, sketching and coloring, getting feedback and letting projects sit, most creative work can't be completed in one day, which means fatigue can weasel its way into the process. Do you work on one project at a time for laser focus, or do you bounce between projects to keep things interesting? Any tips for keeping fatigue at bay?
Mine is yours. If you have something, go for it.
Again, I want to go first because I think your answer will probably be better than mine. Says
the man who chased the universe for his writing every day.
So as I mentioned, I write short fiction, and I'm revising this one novel with this fictitious night sky. And I have been writing and revising this novel since 2013 because I'm so used to writing short fiction where the payoff is much more immediate and compressed, and you can't necessarily finish a story in a day, but you can finish a story in a week or 2 weeks or 3. I wrote a novella once, I think that maybe took me about 4 or 5 months, and that has been the longest thing that I have ever had published. But I would be very interested in the panelists' answers for how to avoid fatigue with writing novels, because I'm a short story author first and a novelist second, and I guess maybe the moral here is some of us, it takes a very long time to get the hang of it, so if you guys don't know, that's okay.
I used to tend to be a laser-focused writer. That is a little harder now, too. But for getting through a whole novel, mostly I keep reminding myself that the first few drafts can suck. I'm a very revising sort of writer, so the pressure is off on the first draft. And it's really brute force, I just keep writing and I don't force it to be good right away. That's probably the big thing I do to avoid fatigue, is I don't worry about quality and put all that kind of weight on myself until later drafts.
Which is another benefit of NaNoWriMo, doing the dump draft. I'm definitely a bouncer. I work on short stories 1 day a week and then my novel the other 5 days and poetry whenever I feel inspired. Having multiple projects going at once ensures that I'm never static, so even when I run up against a roadblock, I can easily switch over and allows me to alternate between the right brain and the left brain sides of things, between writing and editing, and I like that balance. That's a very loud microphone. Rewards can also be highly motivating, be they food, socialization, money, relaxation, TV time, etc. What rewards do you give yourself for your work, and in what increments?
We're supposed to get rewards.
Yeah,
I agree.
I rely on that.
I actually agree.
Maybe you're just a pro and you're like, I got this.
No, I think I don't do that often enough, and I think that's actually a way of keeping fatigue at bay. One thing I do is when I get to a stopping point between drafts or whichever, I'll take myself out to a movie. I actually enjoy the feeling of being in a movie theater all by myself, with my own popcorn and watching the movie. So I'll take a day completely off to just unwind, and that is a treat. I don't think I do it as consistently as would benefit my writing, but it still feels good when I do it.
So I've tried to implement this system before of rewarding myself whenever I get like a certain amount of creativity done. But I find that it doesn't work for me at all, because it feels like when I don't finish a part of a task during a time limit that I had expected to or hoped to, and I don't get to have the reward, the lack of reward feels like a punishment, and then it just makes me more depressed, and then like I don't work towards the goal. I feel like it should work, like I should be able to reward myself, but then I just feel bad. So strangely, not hinging any kind of reward to my creative behavior works much better for me, because then I'm contented with what's actually in front of me. Then I don't feel like I'm working towards something artificial that I'm like dangling over my own head, and I'm just worried about the piece that's on my desk.
Okay. And I'm the complete opposite. I have micro goals and I have macro goals and rewards to help me along the process. So I use Jonathan Mayberry's system of putting $1 in a jar for every day that I meet my goal. The idea is that you treat writing as your job, and so you're paying yourself for your work. And you can only spend the money on something fun once you finish your first draft. And he also says that if you miss your goal one day, you're supposed to take out $7, but I find that too demoralizing for my work in progress. So I ignore that part. Don't tell him, Jonathan. I just use Monopoly money and I stick it in the tub. I also keep track of my overall weekly output, and if I meet that, then I get a smiley face sticker in my agenda. You'd be surprised how effective a smiley face sticker can actually be. And for every 5,000 words I write in my novel, I get a piece of fancy Ghirardelli chocolate. And for every 10,000, my wonderful boyfriend bakes me a cake.
What?
And yes, my favorite food group, he bakes me a cake.
Maybe that's why my reward is so crazy.
You need to get on that.
Gotta guess.
Yeah. And I also reward myself for rejections. So the idea is I get a rejection on a poem or a short story, or from my agent, she says, oh, an editor passed it and all kind of thing, and I give myself a reward then too. And the idea is that you're not rewarding yourself for failure, you're rewarding yourself for trying. So you wouldn't have gotten that rejection had you not tried, had you not submitted, but you could also get an acceptance letter. So I reward myself for both my successes and my failures. And I also save, if I work more than 40 hours a week, I also save those hours as like bonus days off. So like, for example, I'll be able to take my birthday off later if I have that kind of thing. So I have a multitude of motivational tools.
It's intricate and fascinating.
It is,
yeah. Nothing would just collapse around me.
So another hindrance that can come about in the creative process is the shift in the feeling that something that used to be fun is now a chore or an obligation. Have you found ways to gamify your work or trick your mind?
Well, what I found I had to do is, because it did, writing at one point was a hobby and an escape. And then at some point, it became a job. And what I realized the solution for me was I needed new hobbies. So I've been kind of a serial hobbyist doing other things that there's no pressure on. My writing, there's a lot of pressure to make it as good as I possibly can and to get it out there and to sell it. no one cares if when I take up bookbinding or fencing or horseback riding, if I do a good or a bad job. That's purely for me, purely in the hobby realm. When I was doing bookbinding, people would say, oh, you could, you're good enough, you could sell those. And I consciously made the decision, I'm already selling my writing. This is a hobby. I volunteered at the Wildlife Center at one point, which was a really nice balance, actually. Feeding hawks and cleaning cages and all of that. But I've always tried to have something outside of writing in my life with less pressure on it, and also something to just remind me, again, that my writing isn't my whole self, that I have other things going on too. Which is also easier once you have a child. Doing things besides writing is no longer a challenge.
I use that strategy too. That's very close to what I would answer as having other hobbies. The stuff that I mentioned, like hiking, swimming, roller skating, those are never things that I can sell. There's literally things that I can do, so I don't feel any pressure in that direction. Another thing that helps me is limiting the time that I write. If it becomes a grind, if it becomes a chore, sometimes the only way out is through, and you do have to plug away at it. But you don't have to torture yourself and go, I have to write as much as I ordinarily do every day. You can go, okay, well, it's hard right now. If you normally write for an hour and a half, maybe limit yourself to an hour or limit yourself to 45 minutes. And then while you sit in front of there moaning and flailing going, oh, I hate the story so hard, it means that you're exposed to it less and you're not teaching yourself to hate what's in front of you. So I have found that helpful.
It does remind me, the other thing I did, especially when I was writing all day with nothing else going on, is I forced myself to have a day that I took off. For me, it was Saturday. I figured, okay, I'm Jewish. There's this day here. I'm not going to write on Saturdays. But having some time that's explicitly not writing time was very beneficial for me.
The novel I'm currently writing is going so slowly. I can write 1,000 to 3,000 words on a Monday in a short story, and then come Tuesday, I have so much research for this novel that I'm drowning in it, and I'm lucky if I write like 300 words. So a trick I learned from Marie Brennan, who learned it from Yoon-Ha Lee, is to tell myself that I'm only writing 100 words 3 times, and you would not believe how effective that is. I often surpass it and write closer to 500 words. So it's a trick that I'm aware of, and yet somehow it's still as effective. I've also started counting reading time as work. It's hard for me to prioritize reading, and it's something that I often save to the end of the day, and then other things generally take up that time. It leads into it, and I'm lucky if I read 30 minutes before bed. But Stephen King, in his book on writing, says, if you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. Reading is the creative center of a writer's life. And that's helped to allay the guilt that I feel for not writing as much or finishing projects at the pace that I believe I should be. And also, reading is fun for me. Reading is building my toolbox. I'm seeing what's out on the market, so what I'm trying to sell is comparable or can fit into the market. I'm analyzing character development and plot and chapter length, and I'm catching typos on the page that my brain picks up. So I think reading is really important to grow yourself as a writer. And yeah, you can also use it as a tool, like if you're at the stage where you're querying agents, you can look at the back of a book. The acknowledgement sections, often they'll acknowledge their agent. You can also see what kind of editors are picking up your genre, editors and imprints and that kind of thing. So you can use the book as a comp title in your query editor. So there are numerous reasons why I think reading is really important for writers. Okay, so we're getting down to the time where I want to open up the floor for questions. We do have some more here if you guys don't have any, but I want to make sure that you guys get your say. So do you guys have any questions about balancing creative work and busy life? I see someone is really eager. Go for it. Go for it, Hurley.
As a guy who has 1,000 ideas and 0 productivity, how exactly do you brute force your way to getting something done?
Doing I'm going to write 1 sentence today can help with that. Jane Yolen, when she likes to talk about butt in chair,
Yes.
you just, you can brute force putting your butt in the chair, although that doesn't necessarily help with everything else. But I think for starting with smaller goals can help. When I first started writing, if I had thought about, I'm going to finish a novel, that was a terrifying thought. And then someone said to me, well, if you write a page a day, you have a draft in a year. I thought, okay, that I can do. But maybe you guys have other suggestions.
Well, if part of the issue is deciding which idea to do, of like picking which one you have, something that helps me a lot is just writing down a sentence or so of all of the story ideas that I have. And even though I can't turn myself into 1,000 people and write each of those simultaneously, knowing that I have captured them somewhere and come back to them later helps with that feeling of anxiety, knowing that, oh, I can't always come back to this idea. And if you keep doing this, then over time, you will discover that some of your story ideas are still great, and yes, you should go back to them. And some of them are deeply stupid, and what were you even thinking? And some of them, somebody professional has already done even better than that, and they already sold 3 million copies of that, so maybe it's not worth you doing that. So I now have pages and pages and pages and pages of story ideas, and when I come to a point where I go, well, I want to write something and I don't know what, I can take that and I can pick something from the list, and in going through I can go, oh, I don't like this idea anymore, I don't know what I was thinking here, but this one I wrote down 10 years ago and it's still awesome, so I'm going to go ahead and complete that. While when I die, probably yes, I will have far more story ideas in the folder that I wanted to write that I was unable to. At least at the end of my life, I will have written a few hundred stories, which is certainly better than no stories. So, do what you can.
Phone, I have Evernote on my phone, and I just have a folder that's all notes about different story ideas.
I'm also a fan of the Pomodoro technique. The idea is that you set a timer for 25 minutes, and then you take a break for 5 minutes. 25, 5, and you do that for 2 hours, and you get to take 15 to 25 minute break. And so sometimes when I find it hard to get started in the morning, just the idea that I'm only going to sit here for 25 minutes, and then I can go do the dishes, or I can go to the grocery store, whatever is weighing on my mind is enough to just get me in there. And often when my timer goes up, I'm like, oh, I'm in the middle of thought. So then I set a stopwatch on my iPod, and then I end up working for an hour and a half kind of thing before I need a break. And that's usually just like bathroom break, get a different drink, and go back to my desk. So telling myself, I only have to work 25 minutes has been very effective for me. So I like the Pomodoro technique. Any other questions? Yes?
So you're talking about like you're just kind of overwhelmed with research and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And the big problem that I have is somewhere in my mind I'll write to some point where I have to research something, and for some reason I can't get past that until I go research that and then figure out the exact way it should be, and horrible at drafts. It's like I try to work through drafts at the same time and try to write it. How do you get past that into like how do you do your research? You just make notes and just don't write that section because you don't know how it's supposed to be, or does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I put things in, and not everyone can write, not knowing everything, since I'm a fan of very messy, rough drafts. I usually just put a note that says, find out how this works. As long as it's not something central to the entire story, I try to make myself go back and research it later.
I find that every novel for me is different. So sometimes I can be writing a story and I'm put something in brackets like food, clothing, and then just kind of keep writing. But when it's integral to your plot and you can't forward the scene, then I will take time to research it. And if it's something that is more intensive, like for this novel right now, because I'm so overwhelmed with research, I alternate my days. So I will spend an entire day researching, and then the next day I will demand word count output. And then I spend time researching, and then I demand word count output. And that gives me the permission that I need to do those Wikipedia black holes, the deep internet dives, and then I feel like I'm not wasting time writing a scene that I'm going to end up chucking because I didn't sit down and do the research to start. And I'm also very organized with my research and with my documents, so I color code everything. So in Microsoft Word, I use highlighting text. For when it comes to a physical research book, I have sticky notes that have color tabs that correspond to each act of my book, which corresponds to the highlighting, which corresponds to the pens and the highlighters that I have, and the markers, and everything feeds into it. So if I'm writing in one section, I can easily be like, oh, what's in this book? Here's the green, I need all the greens to be tapped, and then I open it up. So it makes the research process go quicker, and so that I'm not spending too much, as much time in it, so that I can get back to the writing faster. KJ?
Another option is to just go ahead and do it wrong in the rough draft. So that is something that I wound up doing with the book that I'm revising now. So I mentioned that it's been taking me a very long time to work on it. I think I started in 2013 or something. But it has only been about a year or a year and a half that I've spent revising it, and I'm quite close to finishing the revision. For me, the difficult part is drafting, and it's much easier for me to write something that I know is wrong into the first draft and then fix it later than stop everything and research. Now that I'm doing the revision, which I like more, I'm realizing how much stuff there is to research. And if I had known how much there was to research before I started writing it, I never would have written this book. So I know myself well enough to know it's better to just barrel through and get something out and then fix it later. If you're the sort of person for whom writing the rough draft is also harder than revising on the back end, that might be something useful that'll work for you.
That scares me. Like what if I'm in my second chapter and then because I didn't research something, my plot goes this way, and then I come back to research that, and it's like, shoot, none of that is factually accurate or even feasible, and now I'm like, what do I do with the rest of this novel that I wrote?
Well, you need to be confident.
Oh my gosh, no. I will spend weeks in research to avoid that.
The most extreme case of like putting off the research, I have a novel, Fifis, is set in Iceland, and I had visited a while back when I wrote it, that had been a while ago. I wrote the whole first draft, then I went to Iceland again and got all the details I needed, and then completely and utterly rewrote it.
See, this is why we do panels, because there's a myriad of experiences, and you can pick and choose what resonates with you. And if something isn't working for you, then you can try something else. So yeah, we're not experts on this. We just know what works for us. And like I said, our process I'll speak for myself. My process for each book has changed. There is not one way that even I function. So it's constant discovery.
Yeah, there's no one true way.
All right. Any other questions? Just gonna see if there's anyone new. No? All right. You again.
Go for it.
What would you like to ask?
So, between work and school, full-time, both cases, I end up with a lot of mental fatigue. Like, I can't really do anything outside of work, and then I have to do some weird rituals to get through school. How do you guys handle mental fatigue, just being kind of bleh in the brain?
I find that exercise helps me a lot. I like to exercise in the middle of the day rather than at the beginning, which I guess most hardcore fitness people do. But I find that having that break in the middle resets me and sort of energizes me and helps me have that energy for later. I'm also not sure how applicable this would be to your situation, but when I started out in the career that I did, I made sure to pick something that I know would leave me with a little bit energy left over to be able to write. So, it's much easier said than done to go, well, just change your career so you're less tired. Like that, it's probably not an option for most people. But you could, I also don't know if this would work for you, but maybe if you change the time of day at which you did homework or school or something like that, it could help you. If you gave yourself breaks between these things, if you said, okay, well, I'm not going to go to work and then slam in creative stuff and then slam in night classes and then spend the last 2 hours of the day unwinding, because that means that very last thing, night classes, you don't have anything left for. Maybe you rearrange things so you have an hour or a half an hour break between everything before you take on the next thing. I find that has helped me.
And trial and error to find out what works for you. But it's hard. It's hard. There's no easy answer to dealing with being exhausted by life and still wanting to create.
I also agree with exercising in the middle of the day. Often when I feel that lull and I want to go take a nap, I go for a half-hour walk, and I find that very energizing. So it's moving my body, my lungs, the fresh air, seeing trees, that kind of thing. I don't know, think about my story, or I try not to think about my story while I'm going. And I protect my Sundays. Sundays are my day off. So anything, except Tucson Festival of Books, that's the one thing that can infringe on my Sundays. Otherwise, I protect them for church and family and chores and relaxation and socialization, just to make sure that I have that time to recharge. All We have 2 minutes. Anybody have a 2-minute question, or I have another question here as a backup?
Back there.
All right, yes.
Why did you all choose writing as your outlet for your creativity?
God help me, I don't know.
Because I couldn't draw and I couldn't act and I had stories to tell.
An obsessive reader since I was a little kid, so it was a natural transition for me to then take up writing. But I also have other creative outlets that don't deal with writing, like she was talking about not expecting to analyze or be professional or be good at something. So like I do dancing, that's really important to me. I knit, I do artwork, that kind of thing. So I have other creative outlets that aren't my job. So I find that's a helpful balance. Okay, 11:49, we should probably clear out now. Unless someone has a 1-minute question.
We could thank you all
Yeah,
for
thank you for coming. I hope it was helpful. If you have other questions, you can talk in the hallway. Good luck with all of your creativity.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. And feel free to enjoy our other shows, such as D&D Journey of the 5th Edition, and Scion Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion hero to Ragnarok story. Thank you for listening.
Hello, this is Eric.
And Wendy Strock with Stone Valley Hobby and Games.
We sell board games, card games, role-playing games, and supplies. We have thousands of Magic the Gathering cards available, carry Kickstarter products, and work with veteran-owned small businesses to bring you our own line of products.
We are a small business retailer, but we offer competitive prices, a loyalty system, and free shipping on orders over $100.
As a military veteran myself, I'm a strong supporter of our armed forces, their families, and contractors out there doing the hard job. So any order from an AA, AE, or EP address will be shipped absolutely free.
Remember, StoneValleyGames.com, where we take your leisure serious.